Short personal story that I wanted to share, and then after I give a little story, we'll just jump into some Q&A and hear what Adam has to say. But this topic, Crossroads of Cannabis and Psychedelics, we decided to have this be the theme because it really touches on two of the big issues right now, people that are into plant medicine. We have fungi and we have cannabis and hemp. And nowhere has that been as apparent as in my personal life. I mean, some of you know, Gennifer knows, maybe Adam does, Lizzie knows, complicated life. He had a brain hemorrhage, developed hydrocephalus, emergency brain surgery, and then was diagnosed with a terminal brain disease called Alexander's disease. It's called leukodystrophy. Basically, his white matter, it falls apart and crystallizes. It's like Lou Gehrig's disease, but for children. It's very terrible. And the brain neurodegenerates. So with a lot of seizure disorders, we see the same thing where the brain neurodegenerates. So children take CBD. It's neuroprotective. It helps with seizures. That's why we have Epidiolex, the FDA-approved drug. And that's why we've seen a lot of sales of that because it's really been helping. A lot of people are familiar with Charlotte Piggy. She passed away last year. And that was what started the whole cannabis revolution here in Colorado. What's unique about that disorder when he goes to Children's Hospital, and at Children's Hospital they have a policy where they won't recommend CBD. And that's because CBD is still considered medical marijuana. And marijuana is still a federally Schedule I narcotic. No medicinal value, highly addictive, Schedule I. So even though we're up here talking about psychedelics and hemp and CBD, for a lot of people, they still are struggling with issues involving the Schedule I nature of marijuana. We have a lot of people that are in prison right now for marijuana crimes. It's absurd. Like in 2021, it's absurd that anybody is in jail for some petty, nonviolent cannabis crime while people are making millions and millions of dollars legally. So that's one issue, is freeing plant prisoners. But the other one, particularly that Alex, is access to research. Because it's still Schedule I, cannabis, there is no research going on. Organizations can't universities, the big research institutions can't engage with cannabis because you have to have a Schedule I, DEA license to be able to research cannabis. So until cannabis is rescheduled, I think it should be rescheduled to 3. A lot of people think we should just deschedule it. I don't think that's a reality. I don't think we're just going to deschedule cannabis and everything's going to be fine. Like, it has to stay a part of the healthcare system, and that would be Schedule 3. That would do 2 things. It would free plant prisoners, because if it was Schedule 3, there would be no reason for people to be in jail for having possessed a minor amount of the Schedule 3 drug. It's absurd. The nature of it would come out. And then the other one is access to research, so that kids, patients, people like my son Atlas, we could research CBD in a much more clinical sense. And like an example of that is Epidiolex is approved for Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut. It's not approved as a neuroprotectant, so you cannot be prescribed CBD by a doctor unless you have one of these rare epilepsy conditions, or unless they prescribe it off-label. So that's the catch-22 right now, is we know it's working. We have a conference like this all about CBD. We know it's helping a lot of people. It's great in palliative care with pain reduction because we have an endocannabinoid system that it regulates and helps create homeostasis in all of our bodies. But yet a lot of people are in jail because they've possessed, THC or a, phytocannabinoid, or they can't get access to it. And we think everything is all rosy because we live in Colorado and we see CBD everywhere. But for people that are in the healthcare system or in the correctional penal system, it's still insane right now. And the bigger lie that's going on here, and because there's so few of us, I want to just talk openly about it, is we heard a lot in Colorado, and I'm kind of in the middle road here. We heard a lot about the lies of Donald Trump. We heard all about the lies of Donald Trump. But the big issue that's going on in our world in cannabis is we thought we were going to have cannabis decriminalized. We thought that the Democrats were going to come in, there was this huge vote that was done, a close election, and it was all under the veil of we're going to legalize cannabis, we're going to push through this legislation, but that's not what's happening, everyone. That we're not seeing that activity right now. And it's very likely that even though the Democrats came in and were like, hey, we're riding this legalized cannabis bandwagon, I don't know if that's going to happen. So I hope that it does. I observed that that was a campaign promise that they were going to support cannabis. We saw a lot of increase in stock prices right when the election happened, but yet, where's it going? We're not seeing plant prisoners being freed. Kids like my son Atlas are not being able to get access to CBD because it remains in that Schedule 1 system. So until we go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, it's criminalized. And we're living in kind of a state reality here in Colorado and other medical and recreational states, but that's not true for people that live in the federal reality. That's people in prison, people like Atlas who cannot get access to CBD. So that's my little talk. Those are like the reasons why I'm here talking about this. These are very close issues to me, and then everything cascades from that. I had a psilocybin experience, and I was going to share answering the questions about psilocybin where it was hard having a terminally ill child and getting that diagnosis. And that whole process of being like, wow, the only child I have is going to die. There is no cure for Alexander's disease. And psilocybin, I looked at all of the protocols, I did the Yale protocol, I did the MAPS MDMA protocol, and I was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take psilocybin for this issue, for this depression that I feel with having this diagnosis for my son. I ate the mushrooms, I walked around in nature, I'd done a lot of crying, and sure enough, I'm sitting there and it was like the mushrooms spoke to me. They were like, stop, we don't need to cry about this anymore. You know, like we all come here, you know, we live our lives and death is a part of life. And I saw it clear as day, the little Atlas came here, had some reason, some purpose, and his purpose wasn't to live 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And that was fine. That was his choice. And it was almost as if the mushrooms were doing the talking. So whatever everybody says about, you know, having these substances, these plant-based, fungi-based, natural, from the earth substances, that these are illegal, like that blows my mind. And the people that push that and represent that, that's suspicious to me right now. So we're going to see a lot of change. It's changing right now, and I'm really lucky to be up here with Adam and Gennifer, who can answer questions and help you guys understand where cannabis and psychedelics converge. That's just where they do in my personal life. They do in a lot bigger ways in industry and business, which they can answer questions. That's how they dialogue.
All right, let's start off by introducing people. So I'm Gennifer Murray, and I actually was in cannabis. I started one of the first analytical testing labs in the country in 2010 here in Denver, and I also was one of the first publicly traded companies in cannabis. But what I wanted to start off with, Sean Murphy, as you already have heard about that, and then Adam Abrahami. He is the VP of Strategy and Operations for Maya Health, which is a software platform that he can talk more about. But what I thought we'd start off with is some statistics and stuff on psychedelics, so you can see how fast the industry is moving. There are 28 publicly traded psychedelic companies right now, and there are 19 private companies, and this comes from Psilocybin Alpha. Bloomberg wrote an article, Psychedelics Replace Pot as the New Favorite Investment. Peter Thiel of PayPal has invested in a few psychedelic companies, and in 2019, $220 million was invested into psychedelics. And the market is set to hit $7 billion in 2027. You also have big names like Dr. Bronner's and the Rockefellers who have donated millions. Tim Ferriss has donated $10 million himself. This is going extremely quickly, and we can thank cannabis for that. without the cannabis industry, there's no way this would be going this fast. We all understand now more about plant medicine or alternative medicine, which helped the stigma. And so psychedelics is moving extremely quickly. I apologize, Kevin Matthews, who actually ran the decrim here in Denver, could not make it with us, but with Sean sharing his story and Adam talking about the data and some other great questions we have. But since it's such a small group, I would love to hear from you guys on what you came here for and what you wanted to learn. But let's start with Adam.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Abrahami, VP of Strategy and Operations at Maya Health. Maya is a software platform designed for psychedelic practitioners to help manage their practices, measure progress of their patients, and illustrate health outcomes. And through gathering data at the ground level, the people actually working with these substances day to day, we hope to help accelerate the rate of understanding, knowledge generation, and acceptance of these transformative technologies by society. And so our goal is to go beyond what is happening in the clinical settings and academic research institutions and gather from really the grassroots from everything that's happening in society today.
Who are you guys? It's such a small group, right?
Can I just say thank you, because I've always wished that I was about this survey, and I've never seen that, and so thank you for actually saying that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I think it's very important for people to understand what is going on. And of course, there's a million places to look, so it's just easier when I summarized it all. But there are some exciting companies, and I'll just talk about a couple of business models. There is the ketamine model, where companies are setting up ketamine clinics so they can facilitate their clinical trial drugs into those clinics. And then, of course, you have Oregon, which is going the cannabis route. They actually legalized psilocybin, so you could actually use the actual mushroom, not a synthetic version of the mushroom. And so it's going to take 2 years for them to facilitate rules in order to get counselors or whoever to sit and take people through those therapy sessions. And one thing about that that's very interesting is, so a psilocybin trip, if you will, takes 4 to 6 hours. And so how are these businesses going to make money with sitting there with somebody from 4 to 6 hours? So some of these companies with the clinical trials are working on molecules that will shorten that time. And of course, there's so many of us that are all about plant-based medicine and not synthetics. But at the end of the day, if you can't get a hold of the plants, and some of these psychedelics are synthetic, it's however the patient can get access is kind of how I feel. Of course, I'd much rather take a natural or organic product, but in a lot of these cases, it's not gonna happen.
Hey, Jennifer, can Adam tell us about that? Just like that tension, like right now, like between the natural crowd and then the reality that psychedelics are going to be FDA-approved drugs. Like, how does the data, how does what Maya is doing, tell us what's going to happen? Well, like, why do we need Maya to have the data and show like where we should be looking if we're involved in psychedelics?
Thank you, Sean. I mean, the first thing is that the work that's happening, the 28 or so trials that are happening with the FDA at the moment, are on a very limited subset of compounds and conditions, and the transformative experiences that Sean has had, or the sort of work that's been going on in indigenous cultures for centuries, if not thousands of years, goes far beyond anything happening in an academic or clinical situation right now. And so the goal is to try and go beyond that, and by gathering real-world evidence, there's this whole citizen science movement going on, and we're seeing it in cannabis. There's companies like Really Spend and Strain DNA that are looking at that and asking users of cannabis to help contribute to the science, and we're really looking line and looking to do that for psychedelics as well. And he's also recommending that when Jen was talking about Oregon, it it's far more than just psilocybin. It's actually all entheogens. You know, it's plant medicine, so it includes ayahuasca, it includes peyote, and there's a lot more than just the psilocybin experience.
That's the key term. How many are familiar with that? Entheogens. Familiar with that, everybody? Okay.
And I think it's important. So in rational basis, scientific methodology, you have to have evidence of the chemical drugs. And so much of the psychedelic experience in cannabis is targeted. In targeted, you have the evidence of self-reported. First person recaps, which are generally considered meth-like, but they're relying on that. How do you, are they accepting anecdotal?
It's a huge challenge, and the FDA and like the trials going on in the FDA do not really accept that. They are still relying on the DSM-5 scales, and yes, there are patient-reported outcome measures, but it's very much, you know, how this measurable aspect.
It's not better of actually being philosophy of how you frame, how you frame the area.
Did we get you all sorted?
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a whole so there's a whole movement going on around sort of the way that DSM-5 sort of symptoms-based categorization of particularly mental health disorders is shifting to more of a sort of there's a NIH released the sort of research domain criteria approach where rather than having symptoms that you're looking for behaviors that indicate that you have a condition, they're looking more for the root cause. And actually what Maya's looking to do is to adopt those kinds of approaches where we gather data from many people across a wide range of different domains, and then with computational algorithms over time to be able to deduce more sort of correlations and causations. So actually our goal is to have the single greatest data set on psychedelic treatments, health outcomes, and symptoms and conditions such that this can get more nuance in these understandings.
What are those root causes you're finding? We have some.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unusual. Trauma is a big one.
Trauma is always a good one, right? So does Maya gather that when you're looking at someone's other treatment?
Yeah, I mean,
Like with me, it would be, what was the trauma? The trauma was that I got the diagnosis that my child has a terminal brain disease. Like, boom, trauma, capital T.
So Maya very specifically today is a technology platform. We're not trying to be the experts. So the idea is to enable the practitioners who are the experts to gather and collect the data that is relevant and then contribute to this global understanding. Once we have that data, once we're at scale, and we're very early days in the movement, and the number of psychedelic practitioners operating legally in the US is very constrained at the moment, but the idea is that will transition. So soon we'll be able to lie from the data and say these are the most important factors to be gathering.
What is some of the data that you gather from software?
Yeah. So I mean, right now it's sort of quite traditional. So it's the things like the PHQ-9 questionnaire, the GAT-7, or what the sort of DSM scale, medically validated scales and assessments. Where we go beyond that, we have a variety of self-reported outcome measures that are tailored to the psychedelic experience, focused more on your setting, preparation, and integration process.
I want to touch on a couple of things you guys said. One, I'm really interested, so I'm coming from the cannabis space, but I'm a cannabis practitioner myself. I'm also really close with the labs crew, who's following this pretty much my whole life. So for me, like, what I've gained from actually studying with like Lagos and Murray as people and like working with shamanic folks that are very much from the lineage of whether it's ayahuasca or La Chuma, and overwhelmingly, especially when you're talking about peyote being included in decriminal, also work on decriminalization. So really, this line between how Westernization and the Western gaze and Eurocentrism and our psychology and all of these really not very helpful Western tools like the DEA and all of these, how are we as, because all the folks in this room, there probably aren't many, indigenous shamans here, so it's like, how are we, and this is also coming from like a hippie NorCal girl going in and seeing that Delta 8 CBD mess over there, how are we staying true to like the plant medicine, the you know, and honoring the ways, like these anecdotes and these these ethereal, non-quantifiable things. How are we including that in these conversations, whether it's lobbying, or how are we including indigenous voices and indigenous communities? Because if you're talking about those, they believe that lycos are polluting the cause of spirit communities. Now, if you're talking about synthesizing it for a trauma trial, and you don't want 8 hours of tripping into your trauma, and you'd like to do it in 2 hours for cost and brevity's sake or whatever, and a lot of times you'll need mushrooms once or twice. This is something we need every week or every week. Like, how are we really making sure that we're able to make money, that we're able to regulate this? Because I'm also looking at this after 6 years of being in California, cannabis regulated, going, oh my God, what's going to happen? We talked to the plant medicine folks, and they don't get it. They don't understand how soul-sucking, crushing regulation is to a spirit medicine like this. So how are we really being respectful to the indigenous folks as far as getting their voices heard, and then what are we doing to then say that to the regulators or whatever the powers that be to make sure that this is salient and thoughtful, and not really what's going on in that other room, which is just a total abuse of, you know, you're treating it like a consumer packaged good, and it's not. You're pimping it out, but she's a goddess. It's weird dynamic of abusive.
So that's a huge conversation going forward, is Western medicine wants to see a PhD.
Yeah.
And then you have your shamans who have much more, you know, a dynamic understanding of not the plant, but also the energy that comes with that, the ceremony. So that is a huge conversation going forward. And are we going to be able to get these shamans on panels and involved? And from what I hear, a lot of them aren't interested in getting involved, which is a bummer. But yeah, how do we mix the two to get a wide variety of what's really going on? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if I could add something, I think that the fundamental challenge is between people that are entering this space in order to make money and people that are entering this space in order to build society. And whether you are a shaman or a Western medicine, New Age hippie that's entering it all more in the scientific research space, if you're doing it because you want to help society heal, because you want to help people elevate their consciousness, then things will be okay. I think where we get really dangerous, and what we're seeing in cannabis at the moment with LTH9, is the sort of vulture capitalist, the person that's coming into the space seeing an opportunity to make a quick buck and moving away from, is this really benefiting the patients or the end user?
I agree, but when we're talking about manifestation of intent, and then we want to have some kind of ethical standard, and in the end, that's like a badge or something that's sort of integrates to the spirit of however we need to integrate it into us.
For sure, and I feel like conversations like this are exactly how it starts. And then there are also groups such as the North Star group that have the North Star Pledge, where it's a collection of individuals that have come together around plant medicines trying to set standards for how businesses and entities in the space should be operating.
I'm coming from I started in this as a patient advocate and organizer and activist and political and cannabis activist. And I definitely, I used to work in geriatric psychiatry at Vanderbilt, doing research, clinical and pharmacological research on vascular mental health things. And so, coming and seeing both sides of that, and also having a great understanding of the spiritual nature of plant medicine, having experience with psychedelics. The thing that I have had trouble with is now we're getting into the situation. I'm in the prohibition state in Tennessee, so we talked about Delta 8 and what's happening with that, and what's happening with hemp and cannabis, because it's federally legalized cannabis. We're just enforcing laws over Delta 9 THC now. And
No, we have not legalized cannabis. It is a Schedule I narcotic.
Cannabis, they're regulating, one cannabinoid out of hundreds of plants, is my argument. It's all cannabis, and it's cannabis. It's just low THC.
It's not until you have someone in the healthcare system. If you have a parent or a child, it's a medical reality.
Of course.
And you're like, hey, I'll tell them.
That's what I'm saying, the absurdity is that.
The absurdity is very real.
Yeah.
It's just a few blocks away at Children's Hospital. If you go over there and say, I want to give my child hemp, they'll say, no, we can't recommend CBD. I'm like, no, it's hemp. I can get it at a grocery store. But they're like, we're not going to recommend that because it's a quasi-dietary supplement.
Right.
And they're like, no, it's medical marijuana to us in the medical establishment. So the driver, though, is that it's Schedule I. If it was 3, all of that falls. You can't keep someone in jail because they have a dime bag of a Schedule III drug. Like, you can't. Like, it falls down. But I'm like, I want to ask Adam and Gennifer, too, where, because we know it's called recreational in the cannabis market, like, that is basically the plant medicine route that we can legally access cannabis, recreational market. That's not going to exist in psychedelics. There's not going to be a rec psilocybin market. Like, where is it going to, or how does it come about in psychedelics where people that don't want to get psilocybin mushrooms from Compass, like where are they going to get their mushrooms? Like, we're in a structured business way, or is it just going to be a black market? Like, I don't know. It's just so different because psychedelics are it's a much more pharmaceutically based world right now.
I think you're going to find that you're going to get people that can't afford to do it in a therapeutic setting are going to get driven to the recreational market.
Well,
And that's because we have
To a black market.
We have a for-profit healthcare system.
But it'd be a
Well,
black
unless they, are they going to legalize dispensaries in Oregon? I mean, essentially, that's what they're going to do,
Well,
right?
so I think something that Jen was alluding to earlier is that with a 4 to 6 hour treatment cycle, treatment duration for something like
It's not
psilocybin,
profitable.
one of the big challenges that the composition of cannabis has to make this profitable. How to take what is ultimately a service-based model, a relationship with your practitioner, with your therapist, that is facilitated to provide medicine to what is currently the mental health treatment model. You take a pill every day, that is infinitely scalable, and to use your language, more like a consumer packaged good. And that.
But if you truncate that experience, is it going to be therapeutic? And like with whole plant versus
We might-
ice, it's the same.
Speaking personally, I think that there's a lot of debate about this sort of recreational versus intentional mindset, or therapeutic versus recreational. I think that turning it into a black and white discussion about there is no benefit for you taking recreation, and all the benefits when you're taking it therapeutically is oversimplified.
So I can tell you a personal experience. So I just had one of my good friends die of colon cancer. He was 48. And the colon cancer spread to his sciatic nerve. It actually wrapped around his sciatic nerve, and he was in so much pain. And I searched high and low, like what can we do, you know? And psilocybin seems to be what would be great for that. And I called so many people. How can I find somebody to guide this? Okay, well, of course, people with licenses, they can't do it because they'll lose their license. So I had the hardest time. I ended up not finding anybody. So then I went to ketamine clinics to see, you know, what that looked like. And I learned a lot about that, and that's expensive. And of course, he couldn't afford that. So it's just a really sad situation all around.
I'm familiar with the situation. His name was Soren. He was really awesome, and it was very painful what he was going through. But we know the studies at NYU on psilocybin was like, this is a perfect application. You know, cannabis, late stage dying, psilocybin, late stage dying, lots of pain. He was the perfect candidate to have psilocybin to help with his end-stage cancer. But there was so much fear. Like, he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to step into that because you gotta really confront yourself at that moment. Like, psilocybin, people think he's just tripping on mushrooms, but like, you have to come to know who you are and like an inner part of you. And I don't know how that gets captured in a purely pharmaceutical sense, with that therapist relationship, sure, but I mean, I was able to do it by just reading the protocol and going out in nature and getting in touch with it. And I don't think that's probably for everybody. There needs to be more structure and a more medical model for a lot of people, but it was sure effective for me.
And I think the key thing there, Sean, is that you did the preparation.
Yeah, you gotta do the preparation.
Just did your set and set.
Yeah, you have to, and it's preparation, and then there was the integration period. I think as more people become aware of that process, what we call the black market was just gonna be more an available market that people can step outside of the traditional, you know, I'm gonna go get my Compass psilocybin drug or go get my MAPS MDMA drug.
So never got any, and never experienced it?
And you know what's interesting? He's very versed in psychedelics. I mean, he's done all of them.
Never got it and passed
Never
away.
did any of it?
No, no, he didn't do it, he didn't face it.
And going back to commercialization, I think that's what we're seeing is that the compasses of the world want to, and there's a lot of articles about this at the moment, but they're trying to patent every single element of the therapeutic experience, and there are patents that they've applied for putting your hand on a patient's shoulder while they're doing it, and you know well, and you know, part of this might be protecting themselves against somebody else patenting it, as opposed to trying to use that to stop anybody else from doing it. But there's a whole, well, the word is now, but I mean that's one way of viewing it. Another way of viewing it is that if they don't apply for a patent and show that they can't patent it, then somebody else is going to use that to try and forget the word right now, but it will come back to me. Essentially, if you don't apply for a patent and show that you can't patent that item, then somebody else can later apply for a patent and sue you for infringement on their patent. And so you need to protect yourself. So it's unclear whether they're trying to do it in order to stop somebody else using this, or whether to just stop them having that sort of legal risk in the future.
So that's the business. I mean, I'm sorry, I think it's business models. And we can say, oh, the vulture capitalists, I get that, but business drives the world. If we can direct market in cannabis, that did a lot for cannabis. But where is that the plant, the fungi-based market? Is it just a black market? Is that what we're saying? That people are going to have to go to a black market if they want to get mushrooms from their person?
Depending on how they mix or how to grow mushrooms at home. It's the same
Right.
with weed. In California, I can grow 6 plants in my backyard. It costs me under a couple $100 to do that, and some sunlight, maybe some water. If that amount of money would buy me maybe half an ounce, that I would go through two months at a time.
How do you do that in the data? Like, do you guys, where do you capture that part of the market?
Well, so we are going direct to consumers. There will be an app that you as an individual journey can use to log your experiences and hopefully to contribute your data to our collective understanding.
And where do the public health and safety issues arise as far as the responsibility of these companies to educate consumers about how to use these substances? Because that's a big concern. Because like you said, when you take psilocybin, you take enough, you're gonna really deal with some potentially heavy stuff. And this is not really like, I mean, if you take certain doses, it's recreational, it's fun, but if you get past a certain dose, I mean, things get real fast. And I think that just like with cannabis, I mean, we have to have that has to be woven into the industry costs of doing business. Like you have to educate your consumers about how to use
Yeah, but what Sean said, psychedelics is ultimately a service model. It is not a direct-to-consumer packaged good. I don't believe we will see dispensaries stocking psychedelic products, or at least if and when they do, it's going to be like the same evolution that you saw with edibles, where the dosing got, initially was wild and got very, very regulated, and you can now only sell 100 milligrams in a packet and so forth. And I think we will see a similar thing with psychedelics, where maybe microdose, and when I say microdose, I mean sort of sub-perceptual, tenth of a perceptual dose type products could be available in the dispensary, but I don't think you will ever see a eco-death level psilocybin product available in the dispensary.
Do were talking earlier about isolating the molecules in psilocybin. One of the things we've seen in prohibition states, or just kind of legal states, is what they're doing. They're innovating around all these other cannabinoids, like with the delta 8. And unfortunately, you look at the labs on these substances, it's really concerning. What's happening in our states is that they're innovating around all these other cannabinoids now because delta 9 is restricted. But again, that comes with some setbacks, and there's concerns that, we look at the labs on this and we don't really know some of the things that are in these and how is that potentially going to be a setback for the industry.
Well, like Delta 8 right now, there's no regulation, so there could be a ton of solvents still left in the Delta 8, unfortunately, and people don't realize that, and that's what happened at the beginning of cannabis. You weren't getting high from hash oil, you were getting high from butane. We would find just, and when you concentrate it, you're concentrating the pesticides, you're concentrating the butane and the solvents, and so, it's ugly, and it really does need to be regulated, but people don't know that. They buy Delta 8 off the internet and they think, oh, it's got to be tested.
Why are people taking Delta 8?
It's prohibition states, and
That's why.
they open back to Delta 9, and this is the thing, like, I think the argument between the lawmakers and Christian scholars is that Mitch McConnell would say, I know you don't agree with it, because obviously there's all these restrictions around it still, as far as hospitals go, and policy, at that level. But we're just enforcing laws that we're trying to have right now. And the lawmakers need to understand that. And I think if they did, they realize how absolutely ridiculous this is.
I think they do.
about this on Action 30 and the CPX.
Look, they do understand this.
Regulatory system.
They do understand this, but you have to look at who's benefiting from marijuana being a Schedule I. DEA, this is a collection agency, and prisons are. States are paid money by the federal government to incarcerate people. That's a real thing. If I put you in jail, I'm going to get paid. I'm going to try to put you in jail. That's an incentive model. So that's why I want everyone in this little tight room to be like, the big issues are truly freeing plant prisoners and then access to research. Because we've seen in psychedelics, when there is the research momentum, more's happened in psychedelics in a year than we saw in 8 in cannabis. It's phenomenal. I look at what Adam's doing. It took me 6 years to get him Business Journal into a data approach and a collection. Maya's done it in 6 months, a year, because there's such a fervor around the data and the science. And we couldn't even get into that because we were just trying to get access to people years ago. So it pumps me up. It's psychedelics, but there's not going to be a record. I'm not going to go down to the dispensary and get mushrooms, or there's going to be a scheduled drug from Compass, MAPS is going to have the one for MDMA. That's just the reality. And if people grip that reality, then they're going to say, well, if I don't choose to be a part of that reality and I want to have access to mushrooms from my friendly mushroom dealer who knows that I care about plant and fungi medicine, there's going to be a market there. I'm just as kind of an economic cannabis guy, I'm trying to think how do we understand how that unfolds? And I think it's like you said, people that understand that there's preparation, the experience, and the integration, they're going to seek it out.
And what I think we've seen, speaking as a Brit about US politics, I feel a little bit in sort of shaky ground, but I think what we've seen with the sort of massive industrial prison complex is the effect of big corporate America lobbying for things that make them money.
Mm-hmm.
I think
It's a terrible cycle.
Structure of a culture and way of thinking it. Is there a constitutional right to your own consciousness?
Right.
Tell her.
We have 5 minutes, just so I know. So
It's over right now.
if anybody else wants to answer questions that kind of came in new, we have 5 minutes.
That's a great, that's something. Anybody else have any questions after that?
When we get the mushrooms at the conference.
I'm sure somebody has them.
Yeah, in the back, yes.
Do you think that the research into psilocybin cubensis mushrooms is going to to open up research into other, like ergot alkaloids, for example.
Sorry, what was the last part of that?
Like the stigma that's being removed from like psilocybin cubenzas currently, do you think that's going to open up doors towards further research into other psychedelics such as ergot alkaloids?
Yes, for sure. And I think we're seeing a huge amount of research going into DMT, sort of San Pedro, peyote, the more mescaline products. Beyond that, ibogaine is huge right now. It's showing real promise.
And these things, they only take 1 or 2 times. That's what's so amazing. It's not like weed where you're taking it 7 times a day.
Sure.
You just need a couple trips depending on what you need, or microdosing every day. But it's so low risk. Although I will say, I just found out last night. My girl Jess Dugan, you guys know, Ganja Yoga. She does. I was just with her last night for surgery, and we were talking about this integration, which is around this. Like her therapist and her medicine person really died, 35 years old. He's been practicing plant medicine for years.
Okay.
And yeah, so and we need to start talking about that more.
So the good news is Adam's software.
Like these things are like, it's happening in those kind of books, you know?
And just on that topic, I don't want to mention names, but my understanding is that that was not a direct cause of the psychedelics, but more of a related incident.
So okay, guys, that's
before
good to
we
know.
spread some.
That's good to know. So from what I understand is because when we're on dieta, you're not eating solid foods, you're not eating high proteins, and you're like, and I fainted on dieta before too.
And
What is it? Yeah. Dieta is you cut out alliums and things from your diet so you can absorb the medicine better, but it makes you a little bit weaker. You're on a cleanse basically.
So the key to all this, everyone, is you gotta start with safety.
Yes.
Whatever you're doing, and like ibogaine, we mentioned that, but the data has shown that there can be cardiac heart issues with that. So you gotta consider that and be an educated user of some of these things. Like, I didn't, safety was important, setting, it's important. I didn't, with my psilocybin experience, I didn't just walk out into the woods and hope that it was all going. No, I had my safety people, they knew where I was going on an adventure, but it was safe. So you
So
gotta
you
start.
get that information in the manual, you learn that from the.
You have to be willing to engage that,
So
or
for the newbies, like that's the thing is, or old people alike, like where is this objective, like the North Star? I love the idea of that. Because there's a lot of people in California that are these new age shamans that are molesting people while they're on drugs. I think that has not been messed by this. Yeah. So it's like there's really some major, like you said, the ethical issue around you're very vulnerable. I have friends that are working with Master Dream that are in ketamine therapy trainings. They had a psychotic event and weren't held space for it because the people in the training with them didn't know what to do. She's got a master's in psychology. I've known her for 20 years. She couldn't speak for 5 days. In her own, she's a ketamine therapist and not a ketamine. So it's like,
one thing
it can get really scary, you know?
don't want to knock on psychedelics, but we have an endocannabinoid system. We have a part of our bodies as mammals that are prone to cannabis. To deny that is to say there's no endocannabinoid system. We know that there is. We just aren't taught, and the medical schools haven't taught that. They're going to start. So in terms of a palliative or just a homeostatic plant, it's cannabis. Psychedelics, and I don't be the first to say, they're used in specific cases, like when there's trauma, when there's issues. Unless you want to just go trip out, and that's not what we're talking about here. Like, there's going to be some people that do that, but there's also going to be a lot of people that go into the healthcare system and get access to the schedule.
Yes.
I think that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. We just kind of did this on the fly because we weren't sure we were always going to be here, what to expect. But if you have any questions or sort of want to answer them, I'm curious to learn from all of you.
the psychedelic
We
Give
have.
people a microphone and they blah, blah, blah.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Gennifer, and thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.